Hi everybody, welcome back. I have the microphone I have to talk into and can't hold, so I hope you can all hear me well enough. I'm John from Apollon, and today I'm going to be presenting on DTS. So before we talk about DTS, we'll talk about Apollon a little bit. Apollon is a company that's laser focused on terminology. We do terminology, it's all we do. We have two big branches. We have an application development branch, that's me, and we have a consulting division, that's other people. And for today, we're going to talk about DTS. So DTS is a terminology server. And what's a terminology server? So basically, for the purpose of this discussion, you can consider it as your black box that handles all of your encodings and all of the coding of your data, including relationships, including attributes, including properties. We look to take care of all of that for third-party applications. Another big part of what the terminology service does is it manages the fact that we have many different terminologies that different people need to work with. Most people don't need to work with all of these. Most do need to work with many of these. These are some of the terminologies that we support. So an example of a terminology service, there's lots of different things you can do with terminology service, but the basic ones that we're going to talk about today is you can look up a code. What's the preferred name of a code? What's the code for myocardial infarct? You can see if you can look at relationships, you can look at properties. So there's lots of different things you can do with a terminology service. It's basically a map. It's like in Pirates of the Caribbean, there's a scene where the guy says it's important to have a map of the world and know your place in it. And it's the same for your data. It's important to know where your data fit into the bigger picture. And it's also, obviously, we're here to talk about interoperability, and we all need to speak the same language. And when we say Apple, we mean Apple. And when we say orange, we mean orange. And a Macintosh is a different thing that's an Apple that belongs to Apple, but anyways, you get my point. So, DTS is a leading open source terminology server. It supports lots of different functionality, searching, browsing, modeling, authoring, etc., etc. It can be considered a single source of truth. So basically we take in, as I showed on the other slide, we bring in all of these terminologies from all these different sources, and we put them all in one place so you don't need to worry about it. Oops. So one of the things supported by DTS is value sets, and that's very important in this conversation. One of the things I'm going to talk about later is validation and how you can use DTS to validate patient data. And part of that is being able to create, manage, import, share, and use value sets. DTS has lots of tools for doing that. It's used by many people to author their various value sets. And as you can see from this slide, we can support very complicated expressions and value sets that cross over multiple versions, multiple namespaces, includes, excludes, all kinds of different things. They can be included based on relationships, properties, attributes, all of that good stuff. So the DTS has several different components. It's a complicated tool with many moving pieces. It's a knowledge base, it's a server, there's a client API, there are many GUI applications that are written on top of it, sample content, subscription content, and as I mentioned before, Apollon also provides a lot of support and consulting, and we can help you with managing various value sets. And this is kind of that in picture form, basically. This is showing that DTS, it pulls data in from many data sources. There's lots of internal tools. There's lots of different ways to get data out of DTS. We have clients that pull data through FHIR, exchange data through FHIR, that exchange data through file systems databases, and people that write APIs and applications to interact with DTS. So all of that is baked into the core of DTS. So last time we spoke, I presented on a use case of an application developer wants to create a DTS application, and we talked about how easy that was. Basically, we provide an API where you can download the jar file that contains the API, add that jar file to your project, and then you can basically start looking at value sets on your own. That's all fine and good. We provide wrapper classes too that encapsulate things like value sets. So you can either choose to look at your FHIR messages, you can issue FHIR messages as raw XML. We fully support JSON and XML. Or you can use the API to wrapper all of that, and then you don't even need to look at the XML or the JSON. So that's a convenient feature. So integrating FHIR terminology service into DTS is easy, almost trivial, very low risk because the terminology service is encapsulated, and it's efficient. It's a black box approach. So today I want to focus on looking at a little bit of a larger architecture, how DTS fits into a larger architecture. So you can see here, if you have your application, whether it's an EHR, an EMR, data warehouse, data mart, analytics engine, whatever you're using, whatever application you have that has a need to pull in data from multiple sources, one of the ways you might consider doing that is you have multiple data sources. They're going to provide patient data. That data is going to get pulled or pushed into a staging area. That staging area could be a database, it could be a file system, it could be a service listening where people post requests. So anyways, you're going to have data that come in unfiltered, unanalyzed, raw, and you know nothing about these data except the source, and in some cases you might trust the source, in some cases you might. In most cases, we're looking at EHR data. So in most cases, you're going to trust your source up to the point of, I've had several conversations today where people have said to me, oh, terminology validation, we don't need to do that. We're getting our data from an EHR. So it's all good and we don't need to check, which to me is like, I often cook for my family and I get chicken from the supermarket. Whenever I peel back that wrapper, I always give it a good sniff. So at the very least, you should give it a good sniff. So the data come into a staging area. You can then use the DTS validation engine, and I'll show a little bit more detail about that in a second. You can use the validation engine to do a validation of the data, and DTS will give you results of that validation, and again, in a minute, I'll give the details about that. But then there's going to be a decision point, and from that point, you can do a number of things. You could have an automated system that says if it fails DTS validation, automatically kick it out of the system, automatically message somebody. Maybe you want to go back to the provider and say, you sent me this code, it's a bad code. Or maybe you want to provide an interface where a clinician can look at the incoming data and choose to accept or reject it, or choose to edit that data and then accept it. So there's all kinds of different things you can do after validation. So validation, as I said, it supports XML and JSON. You can work with the direct FHIR messages, or we have an API that encapsulates all that. So again, you can just get back a list of these are the codes that failed validation. Oops. So we went out and we started looking at the different servers and we pulled in some patient data. And in this particular case, we looked at condition. And we got 100 conditions from this server, and we got 3 that came back that didn't pass our validation. And those 3 were all of this neuropathy due to type 2 diabetes, SNOMED disorder. This concept, this condition example is just an example. We also support all of these other resources. But getting back to our example. So this is the record that came in. And what we were given a system, no version of that system. It's assumed to be the international version because there's no version of that and no, edition of that system. And we're given a code and a display. So when we went and validated that, we got this result back. It came back and it said unknown code in system SNOMED. So there's a lot, so right away there's a lot of different things that can be happening here. One, this is on my test environment. So my test environment is a couple versions behind in inSNOMED. So maybe it's in a newer version and I don't have it and it's an error in my system. Another issue could be that this code is not in this particular edition of inSNOMED. So we can then use DTS to actually go in and do a little research about why there's this mismatch between the incoming data that I'm getting and what I'm expecting. And so if we search in DTS by this name, we see that it actually does come up in the US edition and in the Australian edition of inSNOMED. So it exists in Australia, but it doesn't exist in inSNOMED. If we limit our search to just inSNOMED, if we limit our search to just inSNOMED here in the DTS editor application, we get 0 results. So it's not in at least the version of inSNOMED that we're using in our test environment. So the other thing I wanted to mention is we are 100% touchstone compliant. We pass all the touchstone tests, so that's good, and we thank them very much. We wouldn't be where we are without the ability to test if what we're doing is correct. It's funny watching Mario explain why you should do testing. I know exactly how he feels when I have to explain to people why you should use terminology. So it's kind of the same thing. The other people that helped us very much on this project were the MITRE people. Again, we relied very heavily on their data, and without that rich set of data and without a lot of patients to validate, and without a lot of valid patients to validate, it's very difficult to see how all of this works and move forward. So thanks to them as well. And also we're continuing work with the payer track at the HL7 Connectathons and how QM membership can be validated in real time. And we'd love to have more input and more direction on where we can go with this and what other services we can provide. So please contact me if you're interested in any of this. So that's me.